Way back in the day, if you showed a Pokemon in promotional material or even in the anime, the internet would just light on fire, as it was pretty clear to see the hype around a lot of the more modern gen promotions for Pokemon don't really hit nearly as hard. So if you go back to the earlier gens of 1, 2, and 3, Wi-Fi battling as internet connectivity would be introduced in Gen 4. It was not even implemented until later games. I mean, there was a small internet events around these time periods, but usually these were region specific, especially in Gen 2. But these events were so niche, they weren't even well distributed and people didn't even know they existed. So Pokemon events way back in the day were just super interesting because there was not an internet connection. The holy grail of event Pokemon is Mew, and it's not even actually a Pokemon you can actually get in the game, at least legitimately. This could have caused a lot of bugs in the game, but they actually ended up making it work, and the amount of stories of Mew being under a random truck is just infinite. It's really because no one knew really anything about Mew. And obviously Mew made its debut in the Pokemon movie, but maybe it was just a little bit of the 90s Pokemon craze at the time, as they were just hungry for more content. The only way to get Mew legitimately was without using cheats was, yeah, this right here. And there was actually a handful of events that were only in Japan, and you were not allowed to really get them in any other areas. In modern days, they would probably be an update to the actual games, but back then this was the only way to do it, was these events, and physically updating your games was just really the only way to do it. So Mew was distributed in a handful of late 90s events, and this was also at the same time there was a ginormous craze over Missing No. You can actually force Mew to spawn through actually bugging the game, and it's actually really interesting. For the first time I saw this, I thought they were just hacking their game. Gen 1 is so filled with bugs, you could actually get Mew to force spawn if you do a certain amount of things. This really wouldn't be the case even in future gens, as most Pokemon would at least be obtainable somehow in the game, but with Mew you just simply weren't able to get them unless you were lucky, essentially. There's other things they don't really do much today, like for example Surfing Pikachu or the Flying Pikachu event, where yeah, they just gave Pikachu Surf for no reason and people just bought into that. The other events that were there are definitely nostalgic for their time, and they even tied this to Pokemon cards too, but yeah, I actually own both of them, I know. Throwback. There were sort of ideas that could be marketed in a unique way, but for Pokemon this was arguably even more rare, as you had to really be one of the 20 people selected by Coral magazine of all things to really even get these weird Pokemon. And then you'd have to mail in your cartridge and then get them back on your save file. It was really complicated. This was really just way before the internet, so that was the only way to do it legitimately, was through these strange niche events. They would actually take this idea of Mew being a mythical Pokemon and expand onto it in the next gen with Celebi, and this was actually an in-game event this time around instead of just being an actual real-life event. You could actually get Celebi in the game. However, the distribution of this event was still pretty ancient. You see, the Celebi event can be triggered in-game, but you couldn't do it unless you went to a physical event. So they took one step forward, but you're still technically doing the same thing when it comes to you have to physically be at an event to allow you to get Celebi. And because this event was so poorly distributed, no one really knew of this event's existence, leaving a portion of the game to be dormant by many people just not even knowing it existed, unless they had a cheating device that would actually unlock this, and then boom, now you could actually catch Celebi.
This video is sponsored by ENEBA. ENEBA.com is a gaming marketplace with over 40,000 digital products and is continuously expanding to become your go-to platform for your gaming needs. ENEBA.com offers the hottest deals on any title, old or new. There's discounts for games like Red Dead Redemption 2 to Minecraft to Mario Odyssey, Fortnite. They really care about customer satisfaction by offering 24/7 live support to resolve any concerns regarding a purchase. Whether you're a PC gamer or you prefer consoles, ENEBA has you covered. Use the link down below to get started with ENEBA.
Another way to get Celebi in a similar vein to Mew was actually just going to one of the given areas where you just, boom, now you can get a Celebi. It would be level 5 mythical Pokemon in your game, and it sounds like a lot of work just to get one Pokemon. It definitely is, okay? There would be other events where the Pokemon in Gen 2, like starter Pokemon. The mythical events were obviously in their own league, as people were really curious about their existence, and the limitations to Gen 1 and 2's technology at the time made them incredibly rare. So the thing about events, because Celebi and Mew were so rare, they legitimately, you just couldn't use them in future games. Unless they were given to you in another Pokemon event in a future gen, you were not really gonna get these Pokemon brought forward even in future gens, because obviously after Gen 3, they sort of reset reset that. It was a very time-limited event and only accessible through special connection using a mobile phone and a distribution cartridge that was only given to retailers. So super, super niche. So most people saw this stuff through glitching or hacking, cheat codes even, to try to get this to be accessible in the game. But this was actually when Pokemon events were going to change big time in Gen 3. This is where it really starts to get interesting, as for the first time they really expanded on the concept of event Pokemon. They actually made it into a more expanded in-game content. This would be more similar to what DLC would be in modern gens, but they were sort of starting out with extra dungeons and so on and so forth, more areas where you could actually get these Pokemon. They still failed to actually allow this Pokemon to be widely distributed for whatever reason. Instead of actually making these a part of events, they decided to make them part of e-readers, which some of you have no idea what that even is. I think I even had like a couple e-reader cards, but I never got the ones that I actually wanted, which were the Pokemon e-reader cards. They were actually not easy to get at all. And even if you got these rare e-reader cards, yeah, good luck finding the ones you actually want. There was even events where you could try to get these cards, but they were just so rare, the content was mostly unseen to most people, including myself. When I saw this for the first time, I actually could not believe it, as this was just like content that was not in the game at all unless you used an action replay. So there would actually be more Pokemon that were a part of these events. A lot of the Gen 1 and Gen 2 legendaries were also in these events, so it was in a way making up for the fact you couldn't transfer them over from the previous games. So a lot of legendaries like Mew being in the Faraway Island, Lugia and Ho-Oh being at Naval Rock, Deoxys having his own event at Birth Island, and Latias or Latios would be at this event. And Jirachi and Celebi would actually still be region locked in this game because they didn't have an event to coincide with the e-reader cards. So they were actually still incredibly rare because you had to either get them through other means, like for example, Pokemon Coliseum, or another event for these Pokemon. It just started to get more and more complicated. So they continued into the trend of these Pokemon still being rather unobtainable through in-game events that just were never unlocked for most people. In Gen 4, they did a similar thing, but they added areas for Darkrai, Arceus, and Shaman. The Arceus event was actually cut for no reason, and it could actually be activated with cheats. And it was probably one of the coolest things that I found in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum was you could actually fight the god of Pokemon, and for whatever reason, it's unused in the actual game until the remakes ended up bringing it back. But it was a fully functional event. It really made no sense to me why this was technically not distributed until Arceus was technically made an official Pokemon in Heart Gold Soul Silver through that event, but they had this fully functional event and they did nothing with it. It was so weird. When people actually told me years later that it wasn't actually distributed, I did not believe it because I've seen it so many times and it was like widely known that Arceus was in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, yet you somehow could not get him, made him even more mysterious. And Darkrai and Shaman fell under a similar umbrella too, where they were a part of events that were not widely distributed, but they did have more of a flexible time period where people could try to get them. They seemed to at least market them a little bit better this time around. Or you could just use cheat codes like probably everyone else did, or the walkthrough walls. Gen 4 had the largest amount of giveaway content, and I think this is because the full embrace of Wi-Fi being a thing in this gen made it a lot easier to obtain events. But the secret was that there just was secret Pokemon in the game that most people did not know exist, unless, they were on the internet. So for Gen 5, this sort of continued where they had timed events and you could actually get Victini extremely early in the game at a lower level. And this is actually a really neat idea for creating an event Pokemon, as most of the timed events were just, yeah, here's a Manaphy and see ya, bye. It was really not connecting to the story that much at all, and you actually get to fight Team Plasma to get Victini. It was actually a cool idea. You would get Meloetta or Genesect, and there was cheats for those events too that you could technically get them earlier. Now for Gen 6, you would sort of see the beginning of Wi-Fi being even more of a prominent thing, and especially in gaming culture, so there would be a lot more ways going forward to get these Pokemon. For example, Hoopa or Volcanion, and people were even wondering, wait, there's actually way less Pokemon events in this game, and they actually just started giving them away to people instead of just making them into a actual location where you could get them. Mythical Pokemon in future gens would actually be giveaways, and this was really only just a few exceptions here or there where they were tied to the actual content within the game, like Deoxys in the Delta episodes, or they would just be thrown in the post-game randomly, like a lot of legendaries just tend to be these days. How many times do I gotta catch Articuno, alright, until it gets not boring anymore, whatever. To put in perspective, the legendary birds have been in I don't even know how many games, and yet you can't just, throw me a bone and let me get a Jirachi and a Celebi here and there. Just whatever. Gotta get those timed events, right? Now, as far as raid battles go, that would actually be the way where they would start to give these more rare Pokemon where people couldn't actually get them before, and this was actually a unique way because you could actually get to fight them instead of actually just getting them given to you. And I actually really liked the Delta episode expanding on the really niche Gen 3 content and expanding it into its own episode. That was such a smart move. I wish they actually did that more because it made Deoxys a really forgettable Pokemon in the original Gen 3, and then they made Deoxys actually a prominent role in the story. I thought that was so genius. I wish they did that more today. Now, if we're talking about Sword and Shield, they would obviously add raid battles as a way to actually get these more rare Pokemon, as you could come together with some friends and try to catch Mewtwo or whatever. Instead of actually exploring like a naval rock or a whole dungeon around a Pokemon, now you just get right to it. Some people might like this and say it's more engaging than just getting the Pokemon handed to you at like level 5 or whatever, but I will say that they could actually expand these into more of a dungeon scenario, but I guess we can't win them all. But making Pokemon a part of these events is actually a lot harder to do if you think about it. This whole mythical Pokemon idea tends to fail now in the modern day, and it's really just because how much the internet has expanded in these past few years especially. I mean, compare Victini to Mew. It's like Mew was a last-minute addition to the game and led to the content surrounding the character being a giant mystery. The Mew exploits on their own have crazy amounts of views on YouTube because people wanted to know how to get Mew in this game. It was almost like, oh yeah, the infamous Mew being under a truck mystery. Everyone knows what you're talking about, even though it's actually not a thing in the game. So it's a good thing that, hey, as far as the mythical goes, everyone wants it because it's so rare. It's technically impossible to get a lot of these things, so tend to want what you actually can't get, which is why I brought up, Jirachi and Celebi being region locked a lot of the time. Some of the shiny variants for these Pokemon are also region locked, so to this day, you technically can't get them legitimately, and people don't care. Anyways, you can just use cheats, I guess. It does kind of suck for the completionists out there who want to do it legitimately. Now, granted, I'm not saying it's a good thing for Mythicals to be that unobtainable. I think it's definitely not that good, but comparing it to them just literally handing them to you today and that's about it, it makes the Mythicals not nearly as cool an event. And because these games can be data mined the hour they come out, the mystery of mythical Pokemon is actually just entirely dead. We live in a more online dominated culture, and even if Game Freak tried to hide the existence, it wouldn't work, as people just start actually making Pokemon DLC later games, and I feel like they could just use post-game content that's not technically event content and put it in there, but some people have actually brought up the idea of cutting mythical Pokemon from the game and trying to at least put them in later as, DLC or something. But it's a lot harder to do now considering that the Pokemon franchise is so big and people would be analyzing every single bit of code to see if there was any outliers there.